about a topic that some of us care too little about, as in don't care at all about, but some of us care too much about, I think. Eschatology. And after years of deciding what I believe on many different theologies, the last area of theology that I brought myself to study is eschatology. That's because it's incredibly complex, impossibly vague, and I kind of think it's a topic that God doesn't want us to pick a side on. I managed to graduate with 3 theology degrees without taking any interest in eschatology. So eschatology is the study of educated guessing about the events that will happen before, during, and after the return of Jesus Christ. That's my definition. Before I started studying it, I just kind of accepted what I read in the Left Behind books as gospel truth. That's what everyone else around me believed, so I believed it was biblical truth. The problem came when I actually started studying it. I could not find what I read in the Left Behind books in the Bible. And after studying all the different theories about what's going to happen when Jesus returns, I just kind of decided that I really don't think any of them are right. It may frustrate you to hear that I'm not going to argue for any one of those theologies today. My goal is actually to argue that Christians should not put their faith in any one of the interpretations of end times prophecies. Before Jesus came to earth, the Jews memorized the Hebrew scriptures, trying to figure out what it was trying to tell them. You see, the Hebrew scriptures are packed full of predictions, of prophecies about a Messiah that would come and save the Hebrew people. They spent their lives trying to predict who the Messiah was going to be and when he would come. But even with all their interpreting and debating, they still missed him. It's because prophecies are incredibly confusing sometimes. And we usually can't understand them until the prophecy is fulfilled. Hindsight is usually the best interpreter of prophecy. So maybe we are simply meant to live with excitement about the prophecies of Christ's return and work every day as if it will happen tomorrow. Isaiah 46:10 tells us that God has made known the end from the beginning. But does that mean we can know what will happen at the end of time? Yes, but not in the way an individual knows that a clock will chime at the top of the hour. The end can be known similar to the way that a mother knows that she would sacrifice everything for her child. Not the exact events, but we know what the future will be like. We have not and we will not know the date of the end of time. But we do know the result of the end. So there are 2 truths that almost every Christian agrees on concerning the end of the world. The first is that Christ is coming back to earth, and the second is that we don't know when. But there's very little agreement beyond that. Eschatologists usually fall into one of 4 categories. I hope you're ready. Put on your thinking caps. First, there's dispensational premillennialists, usually called dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is the most complex interpretation of end times theology. But you may understand it because it's the Left Behind theologies. If you've read the books, you do. Dispensationalists believe that there will be a soon secret rapture of the Christians, then a 7-year tribulation or persecution, then the second coming of Christ, then the millennial reign, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth with the church, then a final judgment of all humans. I know it's a lot. That's how they were able to write 16 books with it. But it's just a long succession of events. Then there's historic premillennialism. It's a less complicated version of premillennialism. They believe that there will be a 7-year period of tribulation in which Christians will be severely persecuted. Then Jesus will return to reign for 1,000 years. Then the final judgment will happen. Number 3 is post-millennialism. They believe that the predictions of all the destruction that premillennialists expect to happen in the future actually were predictions of things that happened in the past, especially when Nero destroyed the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. They believe all the terrible things that the Bible predicts has already happened. Now they think the only thing we're waiting on is the return of Christ. And they think the church is going to grow in order to usher Christ back to earth. And finally, there's Amillennialism. Amillennialists believe that most of the prophecies of Revelation are metaphorical. They think that most of the end times events that we see predicted in Scripture are happening in a spiritual realm. They believe that the millennium, the 1,000-year reign spoken of in Revelations 20, is a metaphorical description of the period between Jesus' first and second coming. Some of them believe that the millennium is a heavenly reign of Christians who have died and are in an intermediate state, reigning until the second coming of Jesus. And that was crazy confusing, wasn't it? I wish that I could make it more simple, but I can't. In fact, I bet there are some people who believe one of the ideas that I've just described, and you're frustrated because I've oversimplified it. It's just confusing. When people ask me about biblical prophecy, there's one prophecy that I think I hear asked about more than any other prophecy, and it's the mark of the beast. The beast is spoken of all throughout Scripture, from Daniel to Revelation. The beast, an abomination, especially in Daniel 9:27 and Revelation 13, can be interpreted either as metaphorical, someone who has existed in the past, someone who will exist in the future, or some combination of those. And there are two markers of the beast. The first is that the beast will be in existence when temple sacrifice ends. You can see that in Daniel 9:27. And the second marker is the number 666. Some people connect the beast's arrival to a future destruction of the temple. Some people point to the temple destruction in AD 70. But here's a coincidence for you. Post-millennialists point out that in Greek and Hebrew, letters also represent numbers. And if you transliterate the Greek of Nero Caesar into Hebrew, it adds up to 666. It's a convincing argument, I think. But even if the beast brings about a great tribulation in the future, right before or right after the second coming of Jesus, the prophecies that are used to predict that do not foretell a constant decline of the church until that happens. And if anyone who worships the beast will receive God's wrath, we can just easily avoid his wrath by not following the beast, right? 1 John 2:18 says, "Dear children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it is the last hour." The evil that is described in these passages is meant to describe the world we already live in. So that leads me to my last point. One more thing I'd like to talk about in the phrase end times and last days. One thing I know for sure is that the end times is now. The church sometimes uses this phrase to talk about future events, end times. But 1 Peter 1:20 says, "Jesus was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake." The arrival of Jesus Christ marked the beginning of the last days, the beginning of the end. We have now had over 2,000 years of the last days. So don't read passages about the last days or the end times and fear the future. We are living in the last days, and Christianity is flourishing.